Tammy, an adventurous young woman from San Diego, California, was passionate about the sea from an early age. In 1983, at age 23, she was living the dream of many, sailing the Pacific with her fiancé, Richard Sharp. The couple, experienced sailors, were on their way to Tahiti, enjoying sunny days and calm waters. The trip seemed perfect, a real honeymoon before the wedding. The setting was paradisiacal, the vast blue ocean, the sun shining brightly, and the feeling of freedom as they sailed. The Hazana boat, a 44-foot sailboat, was a dream home for adventurers. Richard, a charming Englishman and experienced navigator, met Tammy in Tahiti, and they quickly fell in love, sharing a passion for the sea and the freedom it provided. But like many great stories, theirs was about to change drastically. In the middle of the Pacific, more than 2,400 kilometers from the nearest land, a tropical storm was rapidly forming, evolving into Hurricane Raymond, one of the most powerful of the season. Tammy and Richard, in their boat Hazana, tried desperately to avoid the storm's path, but their attempts were in vain. Within hours, the hurricane enveloped them with winds of over 230 kilometers per hour and gigantic waves up to 12 meters high. As the hurricane raged, Tammy and Richard struggled to maintain control of the boat. The force of nature seemed unbeatable. The sky was quickly darkening, and the waves began to grow frighteningly. Every rocking of the boat felt like a blow from an invisible giant. Richard was at the helm, his muscles tensed as he fought the furious winds and monstrous waves. "Tammy, tie yourself up!" Richard shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise of the storm. "I am trying!" Tammy replied, her voice shaking as she struggled to fasten the safety harness. The waves crashed violently against the boat, throwing salt water in all directions. The feeling was like being on an out-of-control roller coaster, but without the guarantee that there would be a safe end. "We have to release the sail! You're pushing the boat too much!" Richard shouted, eyes fixed on the stormy horizon. "I go," Tammy replied, her heart pounding in her chest. She dragged herself to the mast, each movement a fight against the wind and waves. His hands shook as he tried to free the sail, but the force of the wind made it more difficult. Finally, he managed to free the sail, but at that moment, a colossal wave hit the boat, causing it to tilt dangerously. Tammy clung to the pole, fear gripping her chest. "Richard, hold on tight," she screamed, but she could barely hear her own voice. "Tammy, get down to the cabin now. I'll hold the helm," Richard shouted, with a tone of urgency. "No, Richard, I can help," Tammy protested, her voice full of despair. "Get down now. It'll be safer for you down there. I'll be fine," Richard insisted, the determination in his voice unshakable. Tammy knew she had no choice. She looked at Richard, the man she loved, and wished she could do more, but his steady gaze convinced her. She climbed down the hatch and held on with all her strength as the boat rocked violently. Below, in the cabin, Tammy heard the deafening roar of the wind and the sound of waves crashing against the hull. The boat shook and creaked, each sound a reminder of the battle raging outside. She tried to calm herself, remembering Richard's words. "I'll be fine," she repeated to herself, trying to believe it. Suddenly, a thunderous sound and the sensation of being thrown marked the moment when a colossal wave capsized the boat. Tammy passed out, the last image in her mind being the terrifying sight of the ravenous waters. When he woke up, the scene was one of destruction. The boat was partially submerged, the masts were broken, and everything around was chaos. Tammy, stunned and hurt, called desperately, "Richard! Richard!" But he got no response. She went up on deck, and the devastating reality hit her. Richard had been washed away by the sea. Alone, in the middle of the infinite ocean, and without the person she loved most, Tammy faced a desperate fight for survival. Heartbroken, and with no time to give in to despair, Tammy had to act quickly. She took inventory of her remaining supplies, finding a few cans of food, some drinking water, and a sextant, a navigational instrument she knew how to use thanks to Richard's teachings. Although she had never used the sextant independently, she knew this was her only chance. "Okay, Tammy, you can do this," she muttered to herself, trying to convince herself. The boat was in poor condition, but it still floated. Tammy improvised a sail from a piece of fabric and began sailing toward Hawaii, about 1,500 miles away. The journey would be arduous and full of uncertainty, but she was determined to survive. The days turned into weeks. Tammy's routine consisted of rationing food and water, repairing the boat, and using the sextant to stay on course. The scorching Pacific sun and cold nights tested his physical and mental limits. She battled dehydration, hunger, and exhaustion, but never gave up hope. Every day was a new battle. He woke up to the sound of the calm sea, an absolute contrast to the chaos he had faced. Mornings began with a boat check, a necessary ritual to ensure there was no new damage during the night. With the sextant in her hand, she calculated her position, something that had become almost second nature. "Richard, I need you," she said, looking at the empty horizon. "What would you do now?" To maintain her sanity, Tammy spoke to Richard as if he were still by her side. I imagined their answers, their advice, and their words of encouragement. Richard's imaginary presence became a motivating force, keeping her focused and determined. "You are strong, Tammy. Do not give up," she imagined Richard saying, and that gave her the strength to continue. With each passing day, Tammy became more skilled in the art of surviving at sea. She learned how to capture rainwater, how to fish using improvised materials, and how to use every ray of sunlight to dry her wet supplies. Each small victory was another step toward survival. She also forced herself to maintain a routine. The mornings were dedicated to sailing and maintaining the boat. In the afternoon, she tried to rest, eat and drink what little she had rationed. At night, I gazed at the stars, a welcome distraction from the oppressive loneliness. The stars were her silent companions, and she clung to the constellations as if they were old friends. Maybe Richard is looking at the same stars from somewhere, she thought, and it gave her a small feeling of connection. Time passed slowly. Hunger was constant, a relentless reminder of their precarious situation. She carefully rationed her cans of food and drinking water, always aware that any waste could be fatal. Dehydration was a constant threat, and Tammy learned to value every drop of water she could capture. "Just one more day, Tammy. You can," she encouraged herself, repeating the same phrase like a mantra. After 41 days adrift, Tammy's strength and courage were finally rewarded. She spotted a cargo ship on the horizon. With the last of his strength, he waved frantically and fired emergency flares. Luckily for her, the crew saw her and rescued her, bringing to an end one of the most impressive survival stories of the 20th century. When the sailors pulled her onto the ship, Tammy could hardly believe it. The emotion of being saved was overwhelming, but also mixed with a deep sadness at the loss of Richard. She was treated with care by the crew, who were surprised by her story of resilience and determination. "You are a true survivor, Tammy," said one of the sailors as he helped her get comfortable on the ship. She smiled, although with tears in her eyes. "Thanks," was all he could say, his voice weak and hoarse. On the ship, Tammy was taken to the infirmary, where she received medical care and food. As he recovered, he told his story to the crew, who listened attentively, impressed by his courage and willpower. Every detail, from the hurricane to the daily struggle for survival, was shared, and the crew hailed her as a true hero. After her rescue, Tammy returned to the United States, where she faced a long physical and emotional recovery. She wrote a book about her experience, Red Sky in Morning, a true story of love, loss, and survival at sea, which became a bestseller and inspired the 2018 film, Adrift. "Writing was my therapy," said Tammy in an interview. "It was the way I found to deal with the loss and to share my story with the world." Today, Tammy Oldham Ashcraft is a motivational speaker and continues to inspire people with her story of courage and survival. She has remarried and lives in Washington State, where she enjoys a peaceful life near the ocean she loves. The memory of Richard Sharp remains alive in his heart, an eternal symbol of love and endurance. "Richard will always be with me, she states, "Your memory is my strength." Tammy, now in her 60s, is often seen sailing the waters of the Pacific, the same ocean that almost took her life, but also gave her the opportunity to show the world how strong and determined a person can be. Her story is a testament that even in the darkest times, hope and inner strength can guide us back to the light. So Tammy Oldham Ashcraft's story is not just about survival, but also about love, loss, and the incredible capacity of the human spirit to overcome unimaginable adversity. Your journey teaches us that even when everything seems lost, there is always a reason to keep fighting. If you like stories like these, remember to subscribe and leave a like. Until the next exciting and real adventure here on our channel.